You're listening to AI Signals Daily Dose. The Pentagon just blacklisted one of America's most important AI companies. And here's the twist. They did it while actively using that company's technology to strike targets in Iran. This is not a hypothetical. This is not a thought experiment. This actually happened this week. This is your Daily Dose, the dramatic showdown between Anthropic and the U.S. Department of Defense. A leaked internal memo that set Washington on fire, and the stunning irony of blacklisting the AI you're using in combat. Let's get into it. To understand how we got here, you need to rewind about 2 weeks. The Pentagon and Anthropic had been negotiating a deal for Claude, Anthropic's flagship AI model, to be used across military operations. Think intelligence analysis, cyber operations, logistics modeling, standard stuff. But Anthropic had 2 conditions, 2 red lines they would not cross. They wanted assurances that Claude would never be used for fully autonomous weapons, and that it would never be used for mass domestic surveillance of American citizens. The Pentagon wanted something simpler. They wanted the right to use Claude for any lawful purpose. No restrictions. No guardrails beyond what the law already requires. Anthropic said no. And then, on February 27th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth dropped the hammer. He posted on social media that he was directing the Department of Defense to designate Anthropic, and I'm quoting here, a supply chain risk to national security. That designation, historically reserved for foreign adversaries like Chinese telecom companies, had never been applied to an American tech company before. The order was sweeping. No contractor, supplier, or partner doing business with the U.S. military could conduct any commercial activity with Anthropic. Hours later, almost as if it were choreographed, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman posted that his company had agreed to terms with the Pentagon. No restrictions. The timing was brutal for Anthropic. Now here is where the story gets messy, and honestly, a lot more human. That same Friday, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei sent an internal memo to his staff. 1,600 words of raw frustration. He called OpenAI's Pentagon deal, and these are the reported phrases, 80% safety theater. He called Sam Altman's public messaging straight-up lies and gaslighting. He wrote that the main reason OpenAI accepted the deal and Anthropic did not was that OpenAI cared about placating employees, while Anthropic actually cared about preventing abuses. He reportedly said that Trump dislikes Anthropic because the company refused to offer what he called dictator-style praise. And he pointed to OpenAI co-founder Greg Brockman's $25 million donation to the Trump campaign as context. It was a brutally honest letter, clearly written in the heat of the moment, and it was never supposed to be public. But by March 4th, the information had obtained the full document, and it was everywhere. The fallout was immediate. The White House cast doubt on any reconciliation with Anthropic. Defense tech companies started telling employees to stop using Claude and switch to alternatives. Officials at Treasury, State, and Health and Human Services directed their teams to move off Claude. Palantir, which gets close to 60% of its U.S. revenue from government contracts, went quiet about its plans, even though analysts noted Anthropic's technology was heavily embedded in military and intelligence operations. Then, on March 5th, Anthropic published a public blog post titled, "Where Things Stand with the Department of War." Amodei tried to thread an incredibly difficult needle. He argued the supply chain risk designation was legally dubious, citing the relevant statute that requires the least restrictive means necessary to protect the supply chain. He announced Anthropic would challenge the designation in court, and he apologized for the leaked memo, saying it was written on a difficult day and the tone no longer reflected the company's position. Anthropic did not leak the post, he wrote, nor did they ask anyone else to do it. It was not in their interest to escalate. But the most striking line in that public post was this. Amodei said Anthropic's most important priority was making sure that warfighters and national security experts are not deprived of important tools in the middle of major combat operations. That is not the language of a company walking away from defense work. That is the language of a company fighting to stay in the game while holding on to its principles. And that brings us to the part of this story that feels almost too ironic to be real. Even as the Pentagon was blacklisting Anthropic, the US military was actively using Claude in its operations in Iran. According to multiple reports from CBS News and the Washington Post, Claude was being used to locate and prioritize high-value targets, cross-reference intelligence data, model potential strike outcomes, and predict risks and collateral damage. The AI that was just declared a supply chain risk to national security was at that very moment being relied upon for national security. Experts noted this paradox immediately. You cannot simultaneously argue that a technology is too dangerous to allow in the supply chain and also depend on it for active combat targeting. The 6-month wind-down period the Pentagon announced only deepens the contradiction. If Claude is genuinely a risk, why give it 6 more months of access to the most sensitive military operations? The answer, of course, is that this was never really about security. It was about leverage. The Pentagon wanted unrestricted access to Anthropic's models. Anthropic said there are 2 things we will not do, and the government decided to make an example of them. Meanwhile, in a twist nobody could have scripted, the controversy sent Claude rocketing to the top of Apple's free app chart. Consumers flooded to the product the government was trying to ban. You really cannot make this stuff up. Here is what I think the real takeaway is. This week drew a line in the sand for every AI company. The government is saying, either you give us full access with no restrictions, or we cut you out and take your competitors instead. OpenAI chose to play ball. Anthropic chose its red lines. In a CBS News interview, Amode said he's sticking to his red lines. His exact words were, "We are still interested in working with them as long as it is in line with our red lines." That is a man who knows what he's willing to lose. Now, whether you think Anthropic made the right call depends on what you believe AI companies owe to society versus what they owe to the government. Anthropic's position is that some uses of AI are simply too dangerous to enable, even for the military. The Pentagon's position is that the military should decide what is appropriate use, not a private company. As of this morning, the Financial Times reports that Anthropic and the Pentagon are back at the negotiating table. But with the leaked memo, the formal supply chain risk designation, and a court challenge looming, the path to any deal just got a lot harder. And Microsoft, interestingly, has said its lawyers found that Anthropic's products can remain in Microsoft products, suggesting the designation may be narrower than Hegseth originally implied. CNN reported the same thing. Anthropic itself has argued the restriction only applies to Claude use as a direct part of Department of Defense contracts, not to everything a defense contractor does. If that reading holds up, the sweeping language Hegseth used was more bark than bite. So that is the big picture. The story you will want to remember is this. For the first time, a major American AI company was designated a national security supply chain risk, not because of foreign ties or security breaches, but because it refused to remove its safety guardrails. That is a precedent with enormous implications for every AI company building frontier models. Whether Anthropic wins this fight in court or at the negotiating table, the pressure on AI companies to choose between safety principles and government access just became very, very real. And make no mistake, every AI CEO in the world is watching how this plays out. Keep an eye on the court challenge. That is where this story goes next. If you found this useful, share it with someone trying to understand the biggest story in AI right now. I will be back tomorrow with more. Until then, stay curious.